Hi, friends from Hometown Church. I've invited Lynn Schoenthaler to join me today to provide a little bit of information about self-care, because that's a topic that's really important in this window. By way of introduction, Lynn and her husband Rob have been a part of Hometown Church for over 20 years. They've got 5 kids. Lynn has been a big part of healing prayer ministry in Lakeville. She was an early adopter and then was a big help in training others on transformational prayer ministry. And the subject of healthcare is of particular interest to Lynn, even from a professional standpoint, because she's halfway through a master's degree in marriage and family therapy. So she's learning all sorts of stuff about this topic. And I thought, hey, why not share it with the whole church? So Lynn, thanks for joining me today.
Yes, well, thank you for having me. It is a topic that's very close to my heart, and especially during this time that we're living in with the shelter at home in place and the pandemic and the virus and all of that. Because the statistics that are coming out are saying that even though we're starting to flatten a physical type of curve with the virus, that there's a second one that's coming, and that has to do with mental health.
Oh, really? So just as there was a peak of the coronavirus infection rate, hospitalization rate, et cetera, there's a peak that's coming relative to mental health secondary to the quarantine and the shelter at home and all the disruption.
Exactly. We're just now getting research is coming out of China, just showing that the rates of people with anxiety and depression and things of that nature are increasing. And in fact, there's, even here in this country, there was a couple studies that were done. And in the first study, it was said that it was in March, 57% of mothers and 32% of fathers with kids under 18 reported worsening mental health. And what's interesting about that study is that they had taken the same study 2 weeks before, and there was a 5% increase.
Okay, so we're starting to see a jump in the numbers.
We're starting to see the increase in the numbers.
It's nowhere near the point of flattening, and there's work ahead.
Exactly.
Now, I know one of the things that you're optimistic about is that the church can play a significant role in helping to flatten that mental health curve that's ahead of us. But you have one caveat, and I do too.
That's right. That's right. If we are going to be people that can help care for others as God has instructed us to do, I mean, technically Christians, we're all in the caregiving profession as Christians. But in order to care for others, the one thing we need to do first is we first need to care for ourselves.
That is really true, and it never stops being true. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I've learned over the years that sometimes the most committed and sacrificial caregivers, sometimes they overlook caring for themselves. Mm-hmm. And then eventually the wheels fall off.
Right. And
they're left in a tough place.
Yes. And in fact, and I've been there, and I've been in that place. It's in the Christian community, there are some verses and some instructions that we take that we can take out of context. And it's something that I have done, such as that I should become less so that Jesus can become more. Or I should be poured out as a drink offering unto the Lord. And at a time when my children were young, I did that kind of thing. I spent so little time on self-care that I ended up almost destroying myself. It was a point in time where my anxiety went off the charts. Self-care is extraordinarily important because without caring for yourself, you can't effectively care for others.
Well, I agree with that. And I would add that personally, I've observed over the years in Christian circles, in some ways that mirror society's misunderstandings and in other ways that are a little different, but in some Christian circles, including the ones that I've run in, the tendency has often been to deny emotional pain,
yes,
or suppress it,
right,
or ignore it, and kind of hope that it goes away if I serve a little harder.
Exactly.
And one of the characters of the Bible that illustrates that conundrum is Elijah.
That's right.
And let's talk about him for a minute. You have a summary of intro for what I'll read from 1 Kings 19.
Sure. Well, in the Bible, as you know, the story of Elijah is actually quite short, just a few chapters in 1 Kings. And we're going to pick it up here right after God has done some mighty things through Elijah. He's predicted that there's going to be a drought for 3 years. Elijah has been miraculously fed by ravens while in the wilderness. He's even raised a dead boy back to life. So at the time, we're going to pick it up, is God had told Elijah to come back to tell the king of Israel that it was going to rain again. But before he did that, he ends up having a showdown with the prophets of Baal, who most of Israel, as well as their king and queen, worship, in which he has monumental victory via the Lord. And this is where we're going to pick it up.
And the monumental victory that he has over the prophets of Baal is not appreciated by the king's wife, is it?
Absolutely not.
Her name is Jezebel.
Jezebel, and she sends a messenger to Elijah threatening to kill him.
Right. So we pick it up. Elijah has his life. There's a hit squad out for him. 1 Kings 19, verse 3, Elijah was afraid and fled for his life. He went to Beersheba, a town in Judah, and he left his servant there. Then he went on alone into the desert, traveling all day. He sat down under a solitary broom tree and prayed that he might die. I've had enough, Lord, he said. Take my life. I'm no better than my ancestors. Then he lay down and slept under the broom tree. But as he was sleeping, an angel touched him and told him, "Get up and eat." He looked around and saw some bread baked on hot stones and a jar of water. So he ate and drank and lay down again. Then the angel of the Lord came again and touched him and said, "Get up and eat some more, for there's a long journey ahead of you." So he got up and ate and drank, and the food gave him enough strength to travel 40 days and 40 nights to Mount Sinai, the mountain of God. There he came to a cave where he spent the night. But the Lord said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Elijah replied, "I've zealously served the Lord God Almighty, but the people of Israel have broken that covenant with you, torn down your altars, and killed every one of your prophets. I alone am left, and now they're trying to kill me too." I'll summarize the next 4 verses. The Lord takes Isaiah through a series of events, an earthquake, a tremendous wind, and then he's showing Elijah, my voice can best be heard in a gentle place.
Right.
And you have to learn how to get there. Pick it back up at the end of those events. The voice said again, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He replied again, "I've zealously served the Lord God Almighty, but the people of Israel have broken their covenant with you, torn down your altars, and killed every one of your prophets. I alone am left, and now they're trying to kill me too." Then the Lord told him, "Go back the way you came. Travel to the wilderness of Damascus. When you arrive there, anoint Hazael to be king of Aram. Then anoint Jehu, son of Nimshi, to be king of Israel. And anoint Elisha, son of Shaphat, to replace you as my prophet."
That is a great account. I love this account of Elijah because one of the first things that it shows us that our response under an increased stress and pressure is something that it might not be aware of to us in more peaceful times. So comparing that to what we're going through right now is that the baseline stress level of almost everyone in the world has gone up. And so what's happening is that even people who haven't experienced psychological distress before are that much closer to their line. So we don't know much about Elijah before we kick off this story. We don't know really what his baseline stress level was. But when that order came out for him to be killed from the queen, there was something about that pushed him over his limit. He was afraid and he fled.
He sure did, and he wanted to die, and he was honest about it.
Exactly. And he was rocking the world as far as his ministry was going. I mean, he was on top of everything after the showdown with the other prophets type of thing. But it just goes to show you that no matter where we are and how accomplished we are, that we're not immune from the effects of stress.
We're not invincible, And one of the things I love about this story, he's a prophet, and the angel comes to him and wakes him up. And if I'm the angel, I might say, hey, you're a prophet. Come on, get over it.
Right.
And I've done that to folks sometimes.
I know, I have too.
But what the angel does is so sweet and I think holistic. He cooks them a meal.
Exactly.
He cooks him a meal. He's serving him with hospitality. And he says, hey, eat this, drink this,
Right.
and then take another nap, and then
Exactly.
have another meal. So there's a physical side to this that is supported by the biblical narrative.
Exactly. Well, when we are under stress, and we can see this in the story with Elijah, is we can do two things. We can change things in our lives so we can increase the amount of stress that we can handle, or we can change things within us so the things that stressed us before don't stress us anymore. And we see both of those things in the story. And the first one is right. We take care of our physical needs: eating, well nutrition, exercising, and sleep. I got to think that he got some exercise as he was traveling south
Oh, I'm sure he
on his
did.
40-day journey.
Yeah.
Some other examples of that we can look at here is that taking a mini escape. One of the things he did was that he actually took a sabbatical of sorts. He took the 40-day journey all the way down to the mountain where he heard from God. And that's something that we can do too, whether it's a weekly sabbatical that we take, or maybe it's even a mini diversion in each day.
I really like that. Another part of the story that I really like, and we didn't read this part, God takes Elijah through an earthquake and a tremendous wind. And the implication is maybe Elijah hoped to hear from God through something as dramatic as the threat on his life. But the point of those verses we didn't read was God was going to speak to him with a gentle voice, with a whisper.
That's right.
And part of what he needed to do to have good self-care was slow down and listen carefully enough to be able to catch the whisper, the still small voice of God.
Exactly. Exactly. So some other things that you can look at here is that we see in this story is that he actually removed himself from the things that were stressing him. He was so acutely stressed, he immediately left the vicinity of Jezebel and her messengers. Today, that might be the equivalent of turning off our TVs or getting off of social media.
Oh, that's a great application. I was just going to ask you, how do we escape the circumstance of quarantine and shelter at home? You can't exactly,
Right.
but you can limit the stress because the never-ending drumbeat sort of bad news and more threat, you don't have to listen to it.
Exactly. Exactly. And another example from the story of what happened in a changing of a lifestyle, changing how much stress you can take on, is he actually managed his load. Well, actually, God did it for him. He gave him the instructions to bring on Elisha as his apprentice.
Yeah.
And so an example you might see this, a friend of mine is actually a nurse in a nursing home. And as I was talking to her early this week, I was asking her, how do you cope? How do you manage your stress? Because what she's doing is a very high stress type of thing. And this is one of the things she said she does, is that she has delegated many of her responsibilities at home. She's accepted help from her family members because she needs just that much more time to invest in herself in order to manage her stress.
Yeah. And I think one of the key thoughts and beliefs that often has to change in order for wise self-care to be practiced is you have to stop thinking it's all on me. And you have to start thinking in terms of intentional teamwork
Yes,
and being willing to share the load,
right.
which Elijah began to do with Elisha. And we don't get another episode of him running off to the desert, climbing under a broom tree and asking God to kill him.
Asking God to kill him. Exactly. He was ready to die. And the other thing with his relationship with Elisha, and it's something that we so desperately need and what shelter at home makes very difficult for us, is that human connection. Human connection is very, very important to us. And surrounding ourselves with people that don't add to our stress, being in community with them, and even if it has to be via Zoom calls or FaceTime, it's very, very important. Community is so important.
These themes resonate, Lynn, and I think it's helpful to say them out loud. Let me just throw out sort of a blunt statement, and let's deconstruct it a little bit, because I think this is something that sometimes feels true to us. Somewhere deep in my heart, I might think, but isn't self-care selfish?
Well, like I said before, I've thought that way. But there is a gentleman, his name is Parker Palmer. He's an author and a spiritual person and a social activist. And he says this: self-care is never a selfish act. It is simply good stewardship of the only gift I have, the gift I was put on earth to offer others. And any time we can listen to true self and give it the care it requires, we do it not only for ourselves, but for the many others whose lives we touch.
I do believe that's true. And I think I will say it this way. I think it's important to be willing to fail forward a little bit. Meaning, how much do I need to create margin? As I learn that, at times I won't create enough, and other times I might create too much.
Right.
But it's really Jesus' perfect track record that makes me righteous and acceptable to God. It's not that I get self-care right on the first pass or even the 101st pass, but we got to keep working at it.
Exactly. And God is the key to help us understand that. But he's also key to that second part of self-care that's so important. We talked about lifestyle changes in order to give us more bandwidth for how much stress that we can handle. But there's also that part of actually, what do we do in order to change so that what stresses us today doesn't stress us tomorrow? And that's where it comes into our thoughts and our beliefs.
Yeah.
And there is no expert like the Holy Spirit to help us change those.
Well, that's really true.
And we see that. We see that in the story with Elijah. He's convinced that he's the only one left. He's the only one left and that he should die. And we see by that end, before he's given the command to bring Elisha on board, is that the Lord doesn't directly speak to it, but yet in those subsequent chapters, we don't hear him believing that ever again.
And he doesn't live that way anymore.
Right.
And the instructions that he's given directly contradict the idea that I'm the only one.
Right.
Because he's told, hey, anoint this guy king, anoint this guy king. That's going to take stuff off your plate, and bring on an apprentice, somebody who's going to succeed you. And as you pointed out earlier today, as we were chatting about this, Elisha and Elijah being the primary character here, Elisha being, I wish the names weren't so close. I wish it was Joe and Bob, but it's not.
Exactly. But we've kept them straight so far.
Sort of. The original Elijah. He and his new apprentice spent the next 20 years working together.
Yeah, 20 some years.
Before Elijah left the stage and Elisha took over.
Right.
And I bet when Elisha took over, he wasn't a lone ranger.
I don't think so. He seemed to learn a lot from Elijah.
Yeah. Any other closing thoughts before we wrap up?
Well, I think the thing that we do need to answer is, when should someone seek help on this?
That's a great question.
Because, like I said, there's some people now that they haven't experienced things like this before. This could be someone's first time experiencing anxiety or depression. And one of the first thing to do to combat that is that people can be very aware of their emotions. It's very important. For example, for the last few weeks, I've been, at the end of each day, I pay attention. I go through the day and I pay attention to what I was feeling, both good and bad, throughout the day. And it's been a very good exercise for me. I use a spiritual discipline called the Examine to go through this. And what I was able to identify, because I do have a history of anxiety and depression. I've been on medication for it at various times throughout my life. And I know that people who have had conditions such as that before are more susceptible to feeling those things today, to having those same things trigger. So I've been watching these things. Praise God, wasn't seeing anything. However, I realized that sometimes for me, because I do have decades of practice suppressing my emotions, it's sometimes difficult for me to really know what's going on. And so the second thing for people to watch is to watch their behaviors. Are you snapping at your kids more often? Are you perhaps self-medicating with alcohol or drugs in ways that you didn't before? So the key is to watch for changes in your life and even to give permission to those closest to you to watch, and if they notice anything, to say, hey, something might be going on here.
That is really wise.
So now this might not mean that you actually need to get help, but it would give you a signal that you might want to do some of those self-care things
Right.
that we've been talking about.
You might be taking a few steps in a direction you really don't want to keep going in.
Exactly. And the earlier we can identify those things, the better.
Yeah.
The better. However, sometimes things, they might be somewhat significant. And one of the self-care things that we haven't talked about was we haven't talked about medication. Medication might be something that people need, or changes in existing medication. So it's always good to be aware and to call your doctor or your mental health professional for those things.
I believe that that's true and fair and balanced, and I think it reconciles well with the Bible. God made us physical, emotional, and spiritual.
That's right.
And part of the physical is we are biochemical.
Mm-hmm.
And we're emotional and spiritual. Well, when something goes wrong with your body physically, it's not a shameful thing. For example, when I had my neck fused, I had all sorts of physical trouble. I took a lot of medication.
Right.
And it helped me immensely because I needed help. Well, our brains are biochemical.
Mm-hmm.
And neurotransmitters are the least well understood of all the chemicals
Right.
in the body. And they're getting there. They're working on it. I just want to give people permission. You don't necessarily go there first, but you don't necessarily not go there.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
There's various components to us. Don't ignore the emotional. Don't ignore the spiritual. And don't ignore the biology of the physical.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. So that's very important. The other thing is that one of the things that we need to do is we need to recognize that when these things do come up and they are really interrupting our lives, when they're causing difficulty getting through the day, they're interrupting relationships significantly, or if we begin self-medicating with alcohol or substances to a degree that is definitely not healthy, is that we need to seek help. And we can seek help in a variety of places. We talked about the medical treatment. We also have transformation prayer ministry here to help look at those beliefs and connect with God to get the truth, as well as pastoral counseling is another place you can go. And another thing is a support group. Many support groups that we have in the area are meeting online via Zoom calls that are free for people to come in and to be a part of. And another is professional therapy. All professional therapists, not all, but many of them, most of them in the state and around the country are now providing teletherapy.
And we'll have some resources available online.
Right.
So that if folks want to check out therapy options, Christ-centered in the metro area, they'll have some things they can look at there.
Absolutely.
Should that resource prove helpful.
Yes.
Lynn, thanks so much for your time, sharing your expertise and learning. And thanks to Hometown Church for being willing to grow in our own self-care and in the care of others so as to help flatten the curve of the mental health uptick of trouble that lies ahead and that has begun to rise.
Absolutely. Wonderful.